Procrastination and the Law of Triviality. What's going on, friends? Welcome back to Productive Pastor Chad here. Stoked to have you on board. This is the third episode I've done about procrastination, and I'm excited about this one. You know, this is inspired from several different things I've learned and listened to the last couple of weeks, and realize it just kind of puts a different spin on this idea, this topic that's always pretty popular in Productive Pastor. If we look back in our analytics and that sort of a thing, procrastination episodes always just seem to just make people interested. So I'm excited to talk about it today, but from a little bit different of a perspective, a little more of a scientific perspective, which I'm incredibly interested to jump into. And so welcome, Productive Pastor. This is the place where we gather together to talk about productive and healthy ministry. Excited to have you back on board. I'm Chad Brooks, your host, and we're just going to kind of just go straight into it this week. No need to drop in a bunch of filler. So in a recent episode of the podcast, How I Write, with Tim Urban, he said this quote, and it just struck me. I actually pulled into a gas station, wrote it down in Evernote to be aware of it. And this is what he says: procrastinators are great at producing where they aren't supposed to be. And that really made me think about it, because, you know, that's the right, if I have a bad day, meaning a bad day where I feel like I was not productive, I will still have a lot of things I got done, but they were never the right thing. They were never the thing that mattered the most. They were never the things that kind of jumped on into that. And it made me think about this idea that I heard called bike shedding. Before I explain bike shedding, it just reminds you that I always talk about there are two types of people in productivity. They're the artists and they're the engineers. I kind of lay claim into the artistic side of productivity. And so procrastination kind of comes with that territory. And so this is why I think the bike shedding analogy works well. Now, bike shedding is a more common way to call what's called Parkinson's Law of Triviality. It comes from, this guy's name is so fancy, Cyril Northcote Parkinson. He was a British naval historian, and he's famous for Parkinson's Law, which is another productivity idea that says that work expands to the time allocated to it. That's why I'm a big fan of the 80%. I'm a big fan of naming your day, time blocking, strategic calendaring, all those sorts of things, because it's the truth. You know, work expands to the time that we have to do it. That's why it matters so much that we know how long it takes us to do things, why time audits matter, just developing those skills. But Parkinson also talked about the law of triviality, and he laid it out through a metaphorical story. And I've got a link to this in the show notes, revchadbrooks.com/PPP/088, that will talk some about like where this comes from. You can read a larger article from the Decision Lab about it, but this is where it comes through. It's a story. It's a metaphorical story. You know, that there's a business and there's a big finance meeting, and they're talking about there's three matters on the agenda. One of them is for a $10 million nuclear power plant they need to build. The second item on the agenda is a $350 bike shed they have to build for the folks who ride their bicycles to the nuclear power plant. And then a proposal for a $21 million or a $21 annual coffee budget for said person. And, you know, he talked about how the committee would look at what was first. You know, the idea of building the $10 million nuclear power plant would be they wouldn't come to that first because it'd be just too difficult to talk about. You know, people would talk way too much. It'd be complicated. They don't want to tangle with that yet. So they decided, well, let's talk about the bike shed first. And they spend tons of time talking about the bike shed because they did not want to talk about the nuclear power plant. And finally, after the bike shed, they decided to talk about the coffee budget because it was the simplest of the proposals. The idea is they're saving the most complicated, difficult thing for last, and instead doing the things that are right in front of them that might be easier and or more fun to talk about. That's bike shedding. And its simplest term, bike shedding, is putting off the more important things because of their complexity, the amount of energy they might take. And the trivial so many times is more attractive because it does not cost us as much. But the only problem is if we put off things long enough, regardless of how big or small they are, they're going to turn into major issues. So remember, the idea of procrastination, as according to Tim Urban, is that we're great at producing what we're not supposed to be producing. And to bike shed is just another way that we're staying away from the things that we really need to be doing. So in this episode, what I want to walk through are 5 ways to not bike shed. So the first one is this: get squared away. We're learning this term from Jocko Willnick on the Jocko podcast. Just get your stuff together, like get ready for things, be prepared, be just good to go. We waste time so many times if we have to be picking up things or reacting. Back when I was on YouTube like crazy, every YouTube video started with, I just cleaned my office because it was a total gar hole. That's why I like podcasting, because you can't see how messy my office is right now, because it absolutely is a gar hole. But I feel like sometimes I cannot do big things if my office is messy. And so how many times have I avoided the big things because I don't want to clean my office? How many times has life gotten hectic because you didn't take care of the little stuff? I had to go to the tire change place at 7 o'clock in the morning this week to get something taken care of that I should have done the week before, but I didn't want to give up good time to go to the tire change place. So I ended up going there at 7 o'clock in the morning, then driving 3 hours after I got done with the tire place. Getting squared away means building up shutdown routines. I've talked about that in the podcast and other places before. It means stocking up on supplies, knowing like if I need to do my work, I need to make sure I've got pens and paper to do my work. That sort of stuff. Being squared away is just being prepared for what might happen. Think through how you might waste time simply because you've not taken care of the necessary things. They might not be the most fun, but when multiplied together, they can have significant consequences. And so sometimes it's just about building in those repetitions and those systems to take care of the little tiny stuff because it matters, even though it seems insignificant and small, before it multiplies into a giant chaos monster. Or other times it's just realizing I'm going to stay on top of things. I'm going to stay squared away because that makes life easier. And that means I don't have to go into reactive mode so much. So that's the first way to not bike shed, is to just be squared away. Second way is this: declare your focus. This is simple. This is basic productive pastor stuff. Having a handful of yearly focuses, understanding where those fit into the quarter, your month, the week, and the day. This is season 1 of Productive Pastor. This is episode 6 through 11. This is the Becoming Productive course. If you are struggling with all these things, go to the show notes. Pick up the Becoming Productive course. It is all about this sort of thing of declaring the focuses stretched out across the year. If you know what matters, you are going to be able to think through the trivial and realize why and when you need to drill down. And you've just got to make it there through the point. Sometimes productivity is not about sheer tenacity, but sometimes productivity is absolutely about sheer tenacity. And this is one of those moments saying, I've got to know what's important and I've got to stay focused and be drilled down. And the best way to do that is to declare focuses in a strategic manner. Here's where you knowing what you are walking into each day matters. It's going to be significantly easier to bike shed if you walk into the office each day with literally no plan for the day. Like let me just see what happens, or I might read a little bit, or I might make a couple phone calls. Well, no big deal, no big day. That's doing ministry in a reactive mode, just waiting to see what's going to get your attention. No, yes, we have to be responsive, and that's really different from being reactive. Being responsive means handling emergencies that come with ministry alongside of also knowing what your priorities are for that week and planning for responsiveness and time. Sometimes things need to move from what you had on your plate. But, if you're in a solo pastorate situation, Sunday is always coming. Like you always have to have the sermon ready. You have to have those sorts of things there, which means we have to strategically be productive around our time. Episode 25 is where I talk about scheduling for 80%. This is really, really just kind of bare bones. It's realizing that, 20% of my time as a pastor is probably going to have to be being a little bit responsive. And so let me plan as far as how that is concerned. It is a great way to manage what and how to keep up with all the things in ministry. It's a learned behavior for the more artistic expressions of productivity. But start small, work your way forward. If you've never done any sort of strategic calendar for the year or anything, plan small. Declare just, hey, I'm going to focus on 2 things this year that I want to see happen over the year. You don't have to go full tilt boogie into these sorts of things. But if you're hearing this and you're realizing I need to pay attention to this, I need to learn from this, go pick up the Becoming Productive course. It's not expensive, and it is a fantastic way to walk you through what these processes might be like. So the second way to avoid bike shedding, to not bike shed, is to declare your focus. Third thing, share your focus. Every week I try to, and I'm not in the last couple of weeks, but #holidays. I try to come on the Productive Pastor community on Facebook and just create a post saying, hey, what's your focus this week? Sometimes just sharing it anywhere, sharing a focus or sharing a point of accountability, any of that sort of stuff, it has this weird psychological way of keeping you accountable to it and able to keep focused on that. So you start sharing the work of your larger focuses. And also, this is kind of part of getting things squared away. It's going to be a lot easier to lead staff and lead church leadership towards broader goals and approaches when you've got your own stuff together, like if your life is constant chaos, you're going to have a really hard time helping other people realize this matters. At this point, when you move into like larger shared goals, you're also keeping each other mutually accountable because all of your focus is stacked together towards a large goal. So, make those focuses and share those focuses. And here's the thing, even if you don't have the ability to share them with someone else and you don't want to pop on a productive pastor community and kind of respond to that post, you can share them with yourself. Do a weekly review, assess how well you were able to stay on track, how you were able to stay out of the bike shed, how you were able, why is that phrase so hard? How you were able to work towards what's actually important and not trivial. That's the filter maybe. Is this thing trivial? Am I just chasing a rabbit or chasing energy and simply calling it ministry? Or does this align with the focuses and the things that I need to be working on? So that's the third way to stop bike shedding, is to share your focuses. The fourth way to stop bike shedding is have a place to bike shed. Especially if you're the more artistic side of things, more creative, the more builder, that sort of piece. Have a place to bike shed. And I've told this stories before. The impetus, the beginning point of this podcast, like over 10 years ago, this was my bike shed. I was having these conversations on Twitter. I was talking about this with seminary friends. I was an associate pastor at a church that was not filling my time up. And I decided to, let's do this podcast for 10 episodes. Let's just see what happens, because it gave me a way to think through things that was not work. It let the part of my mind that needed to bike shed, because our minds also need to do this. Our minds need to run around. Our minds need to have a playground as well. And so think what that is. My favorite bike shed right now, you might be actually hearing it running in the background. I kind of hope so, kind of hope not. But I got a 3D printer, and it's something absolutely trivial and utterly trivial, but it lets my mind run off too. So like when I stop work, I can watch YouTube videos about 3D printing, or I can work on learning Fusion 360. And for me right now, this matters because I work out of my house 80% of the time. The desk where I'm sitting right now recording this podcast, the desk where I have coaching calls from, the desk where I do development plans and I build every single thing, where I write sermons, all of it is the exact same desk where I have my morning devotions. It's like my favorite place in the house, or at least one of them. It's also super comfortable. I love my office. It's kind of like a dream office, but the issue is, what do I do at 7 o'clock at night, 8 o'clock at night, when my wife goes to bed early, or on Saturdays, and I sit down to my work desk? Now, I'm trying really hard to not fire up work stuff and think about it. So I've given myself a bike shed. I've given myself a way that when I want to think deeply, when I want to try hard, when I want to do that kind of stuff, I've got a thing to bike shed with. And for me, that's 3D printing. You might have another one. Also, what about the middle of the week? If you have some sort of a church-related fascination, and this is what I learned, it's 3:30 in the afternoon, you're in the office, your brain is pretty much dead, but you've got a finance meeting coming up at 5:30 and you don't want to go home, that sort of a thing. Like, what do I do when I'm sitting here at the office? You could push through and try to get stuff done, but that's just going to wear you out even more. But your brain needs to be better for this meeting. Have a little bit of a theological or ministry bike shed. For me, it's reading. It's always reading, but for the last few years, it's been reading church history. It's related enough to keep me in the zone, but it's different enough to be relaxing. It lets me bike shed a little bit to get me back onto the focus and onto the places where things are not trivial. And the fifth way to not bike shed is this: run your program. The tagline for the podcast I've been working on as I've been kind of redeveloping things for 2024 is this: healthy ministry through strategic productivity. Healthy ministry through strategic productivity. There's something about realizing when we're able to stay on focus, when we're able to stay in the game, that we're not just doing ministry, but we're doing ministry in a way that's healthy, a way that's healthy for us, a way that's healthy for our church, a way that's healthy for our families, all those sorts of things. It's our strategic productivity. So run your program, have a focus. There's no such thing as a church that's too small for you to not be focused on. Now, the focuses might shift and change as the church grows or as you change churches, all that sort of stuff, but it's completely appropriate to always have a strategy, to always have that focus. So run your program, but also be realistic. You don't want to be going 110%. There's a productivity writer that gets shared around in the community a little bit, and he'll pop up on Twitter. I'll read his stuff, and I like what he has to say a lot of the times, but other times it's If you want your church to grow, be committed to working 70 hours a week for the next 2 years. Friends, I've done that. It's not healthy. Runs you ragged. Have a program. Learn to be responsive. Learn to do all the things we've talked about, especially over the last 4 or 5 months. We talked a lot about learning skills under the productive pastor. But do them in a way where you can be creating margin for your church to be healthy and for you to be healthy, for you to be spending time on the things that are not trivial. To learn what does it mean to not bike shed in the trustees meeting. I was in a church one time where the trustees talked about getting a different color sugar for 6 months. We bike shedded on talking about sugar. Learn these things, learn to know what your strategic plan is and stick to the plan because you believe in the plan, but be realistic about what is appropriate inside of that. Filter those things out where this just might not be the best idea because it'll be too resource hungry. We don't have the ability to do it, but there's something else that is worth it, and learn what it means, to focus in and to drill down on those sorts of things. So that is 5 ways to not bike shed. Number 1, get squared away. Number 2, declare your focus. Number 3, share your focuses. Number 4, have a place to bike shed. And then last, run your program, but be realistic. Friends, it's an honor to host this conversation, to be here, Productive Pastor. Come hang out at the Productive Pastor community on Facebook, the Productivity Party. 1,000 pastors talking about these sorts of things. We'd love to have you on there. Also, make sure to hit the show notes, revchadbrooks.com/PPP/088. Grab the links, grab the things. Find out if you might want to do like some of the courses that we've developed, or if you might want to inquire about what does one-on-one coaching look like, something along those lines. But until the next time we come on, just stay healthy and stay productive. And I'll see you later.